Hey everybody, welcome here to the channel. I'm Twister Strudel, and today we have a little bit of a lineup here for you. We are going to get started with the finale of the top 45 board games of all time, of course, in my opinion. This is going to be from 15 forward, my top 15 games of all time. And again, as far as the criteria goes, if you haven't checked out the other two lists, you can check them out on stream right now. I'm also going to be releasing these on YouTube very soon, actually really soon. So you can check those out as far as if you want to get an idea of the criteria or what was going on with the first 30 games. You can go check that out. But these are my top 15 games, and I think, looking at the list here, there's a good variety of games. I'm actually really excited. If it's one of those, if if I were to play like just these 15 games this year, they'd be a pretty stellar year altogether. But without further ado, let's get right onto it. Waste no time here. So, my number 15 game is going to be what's called a dice drafting game. You're going to be rolling these dice, picking them, and choosing which dice you want to put onto your board. This is Sagrada. Now, here again, like I said, there's going to be these different colored dice, and you're placing them on the board to essentially create this stained glass window. And depending on what your goals are for the round, it's going to determine exactly which dice you want to pick up and how you want to arrange it on your board. And of course, as with many of these games, the most points wins. For one, the production quality is absolutely amazing, both if you're playing for the physical version and the digital version. Direwolf Digital did a fantastic job of putting this on the app, but with the physical ones, you get these colored dice, and I specifically love dice in general, but to have these colored dice as well, to be able to roll all these different dice, it just feels good to throw around, and it looks great on the board. I also do enjoy the drafting system. It goes through a snake draft, so the first player of that round will pick one, going second, third, fourth, however many players you have, and then it goes backwards from fourth to first. And so, when you're picking your dice, not only do you have to puzzle out how best to utilize your board, you can also think about what your potential opponents might be picking out as well. And so that might change a little bit on exactly which dice you want to pick. Maybe you have two in mind, but one is going to be more of a hot commodity among the dice pool for that round. So you kind of want to think a little bit about your turns and exactly how you want to pick and arrange that dice. Fantastic game, absolutely drop dead gorgeous. This is Sagrada. My number 14 is a deck building adventure. Actually, it's Clank, a deck building adventure. This is also a new one to the list. The Sagrada was also new to the list this last year. These are both new games. And in Clank, you play as adventurers diving into the dungeon to grab as much loot from the depths below and to come back up before your health drops to zero or before you are being taken over by the monster. And so you're doing this using a tactic called deck building. You're starting with a basic deck, and then throughout the game, you're going to be purchasing more cards that you add onto it. And these different cards are going to help stylize your deck to make it more unique than other people, and it's going to allow you to do different things. You might purchase cards to travel further into the dungeon, maybe to battle other creatures, or to allow you to purchase even more cards throughout the game. And my favorite aspect with this one is the titular Clank mechanics. Whereas you move around, you're going to make noise, and it's symbolized by these little cute cubes that you put into this bag. And when the monster attacks, if he pulls out your cubes, your colored cubes, then that will whittle down your health for each cube that he pulls out. And the more noise you make, the higher chance the monster will attack you. So even if you're making noise, it's not guaranteed, but there is a good chance that he will come for you. And as a result, some of the better cards in the deck will naturally force you to create more noise. So you can choose to play it safe and be a little bit more sneaky, maybe while you might be doing less, but at least you can stay down there a little bit longer. The monster won't attack you. He'll pay attention to other people. Or you could play like a bull in a china shop where you're trying to do everything you can and just blaze through, grabbing everything and getting back to the top before the monster deals that final hit. Or as normally you can find a middle ground. There's a couple different ways you can go about it. And deck building in general always has a great feeling of progression, that idea that you're starting with that basic hand, that basic deck that you have, and then you're personalizing it and making it feel like you're getting powerful as the game goes on, which is great. But the thing I find unique about this one over other deck builders is that tactile nature of the board, being able to physically see the dungeon, having those dungeon crawling elements per se. It's a really cool way to utilize the deck building aspect of it. And so I enjoy that tactile nature. I enjoy a whole lot that this game brings. I play it with my wife and I have played it with a couple friend of ours recently, and so yeah, this is a really solid game. That's gonna be Clank, my number 14. My number 13 is a party game, and this one was on the list last year as number 7, so it drops down a little bit. But this is going to be One Night Ultimate Werewolf. Now, this is a party game that plays off of the werewolf or the mafia system, but it's all over the course of only one night. And so if you kind of don't know that system, it's with this game, everyone's going to get a role. Either you're going to be on the villager side or the werewolf side, and most of them will have a special ability with this game here. So during the night phase, each person with a role will utilize their abilities during the night. Some of them will be classic, like from the classic game. You know, werewolves will get to see who is on their team at the beginning of the game, or at the beginning of the night per se. The seer gets to look at the identity of one person whom is around the table. But there are some crazier roles that are added with this game too. You have someone like the robber or the troublemaker who will switch roles around, and if a role is ever switched, those people become their new role even if they don't know it. And so during the day, once that night phase is over, the daytime people will explain what has happened during the night to try and figure out who you want to vote for. The villagers obviously trying to vote out a werewolf, werewolves trying to be sneaky and fool the villagers. But of course, what people might say, there might be some people who would lie about what they're saying and trying to either hide their identity or to force the truth out of others. And so because there's only one round in a game, rather than, you know, the regular werewolf where it lasts throughout many rounds, and, you know, so you have some people who might be eliminated really early who just don't have anything to do, there's only one round. So it allows you to potentially go even bigger with your lies and your deception if you want to do that. You could also have a round where someone comes up with a brilliant cover-up or flames out in glorious fashion. Or you can play like some people that I've played with who are a little bit more reserved and they're very quiet and yet very calculated when they talk. There's lots of room for outrageous events, and with it being so short, there's less weight to winning or losing, kind of like Chameleon, what I had in a previous list earlier. And again, with having no player elimination, that's a huge plus, at least for myself, with this game. There is a bit of a drop here. Like I said, it dropped 6 places, and that's simply due to the lack of players not being able to meet and pull this game out. Yeah, I would say that would be the biggest reason, but nonetheless, it's still one of my favorite games. I would like to see this game played more often this year. That's going to be One Night Ultimate Werewolf. My number 12 is also one that was on the previous list as number 9, so it dropped a little bit, but that's, you know, it's still basically right where it is. This is Tiny Epic Kingdoms. And so this plays, the way I best describe it is that it plays very similar to a board game version of a real-time strategy game. Where you have your own fantasy race and you're building up your empire, upgrading abilities, fighting others, and then with the expansion, it also introduces towers and heroes in there as well. And so I like that I get that real-time strategy feel in the board game. And even if it isn't as fleshed out as something like a Civilization game or a true RTS, it also carries that feel over a relatively short period of time. So I would say up to an hour's tops, especially once you actually know how the game plays. Like Galaxies, Tiny Epic Galaxies, you get to utilize actions as others are going as well. So you can either, as someone takes a move or potentially trades in resources, you get to copy their actions, or as an alternative, you get to gather resources to help prepare you for when you do want to utilize your own actions. I also find combat very intriguing. This idea that you're spending resources to determine how much you want to spend in combat, how much you want to hit the other people for. But you don't know exactly how much the opponent will spend, so you're determining this with this really cool 12-sided dice, but you're hiding it from your opponent and setting it as to how much power you want to put into this attack based off the resources you have. And so you're trying to make this educated guess as to how much you need to win while still having other resources. Or if you just want to go for the win or try and maybe present an option to make peace with them, you can, but that there's no guarantee that they will do the same. And so again, this is one of my favorite games as far as like a war game is concerned. It's a nice small package, and it doesn't go on for hours, which is something that I personally enjoy. It did drop a little bit, like I said, due to probably a lack of games and just new games coming in. But this is still my favorite of the Tiny Epic Games franchises. That's Tiny Epic Kingdoms. Number 11 is also new to the list. So we have already 3 games that are new in my top 15 here. This is Football Highlights 2052. So, like Baseball Highlights, which I mentioned earlier, you're going to be playing these different players, both either human, cyborg, or robot, to act as both offensive and defensive plays. And you're trying to score the most points through touchdowns and field goals while preventing the other team from scoring, just like football. So like Baseball Highlights, which I previously mentioned, I enjoy that back and forth nature with opponents. I like that thinkiness where you might want to save some of your cards earlier on to utilize their special abilities, but you also want to react to how your opponent is playing as well. Maybe they have this big play that you need to stop, and you need to lay down maybe one of your better cards so that they don't get that touchdown, but that might ruin some of your plans. So it's this very thinky type of game where you kind of have to plan it out. And of course, there's that drafting system as well, where in between, I think in between the half, either the half or in between games itself, you get to draft new players into your team and replace some of your older ones, maybe trying to grow in your strengths or cover up some of your weaknesses. And I really like that. It is a little bit more complex than Baseball Highlights. I think if you're someone who doesn't, it doesn't matter about the sports, but you do care about the complexity, I think Baseball Highlights is a much easier game to get a grasp as to how it plays. But I actually really enjoy the complexity that this one brings. And part of the reason why I like this more than Baseball Highlights is because I also like football more than I like baseball as a sport. So that does play a little bit of a factor into it. But nonetheless, it's still a fantastic game. They're both very similar. But this one just kind of edges the other one out. And that's why it's going to make my number 11, Football Highlights 2052. My number 10 is also a new game. So quite a few new games, especially on the lower half of this top 15 list. This one is Citadels. So here in Citadels, you're building up your city, getting the most points by the end of the game, depending on what type of city cards you have all together and the values that they're worth. Maybe they have some special abilities. But you're going to have set characters throughout the game, and every round, everyone is going to choose one of those characters available that round, either utilizing their ability to obtain gold and to purchase buildings, amongst other abilities as well. Sometimes characters will allow you to force someone to skip a turn, or allow you to get rid of a city card that is on someone else's tableau, per se. And so I enjoy the variety of characters. It allows for very different strategies, and they're very fun to utilize. And again, like I said, some are very interactive, where you can attempt to hinder other people's progress, and some abilities are just very helpful for your own engine. So depending on the type of thing that you like, maybe you're someone who really enjoys just that solo, not necessarily solo, but a more solitaire experience with your friends, where you're just trying to build it up as fast as you can. Or maybe you want to be that troublemaker who tries to hinder other people while trying to, just to slow them down while you get your own civilization built up. And of course, as the game progresses, you do get cards that help you gain further actions during your turn, or that help to score later with that. And so you can kind of plan around what buildings you buy and what buildings are available. And the components and the art are very good in this one. I really love the art in this game. I would be interested to see, because I haven't played this a whole lot, but I'd be very interested to see where it will shake up in a year or two, see what happens. But for today, that is going to be my number 10, Citadels. My number 9 is another party game that actually jumped up. It was 22 last year, so it did make my 25 games of all time last year, and now it's number 9, jumped up 13 places. This is going to be Just One. This is a party game that's cooperative. You choose one person of whom the team wants to guess the key word for that round, and you're going to help them guess by giving a one-word clue. Everyone else is going to give a one-word clue to try and help that guesser. But before the guesser gets to look at the clues, the teammates compare their clues, and if any two or more people have identical clues, it's eliminated from the clues that are available to the guesser for that round. And so it means that for clues, you have to be a little bit more creative. Like, you can't be too obvious that your team is going to have clues that match up. Otherwise, you're not actually going to help the person who's trying to guess the word. But you can't be too vague either, that the person can't guess, that it's way too bizarre. And it's something that's similar with like Decrypto, where you're trying to come up with these very clever clues. But I like this one because you're working as a team, which is always a very neat thing. It makes it a little bit more accessible in that way. But I also just like how simple this is to teach and play over something like Decrypto. You could do a couple rounds over 15 minutes, have a good time, and then just move on to the next thing. The concept itself is also incredibly easy to understand by most, and so it's moved up due to the plays that I have had this year, and it's worked in many different ways. I've played a lot of this on Zoom, and each time it's worked extremely well with whatever game group, and so that's going to be just one. My number 8 is yet another new game to the list. Quite a few, especially on the bottom half of this. This is going to be Stockpile. So here you're playing as investors that are buying and selling stocks to make the most money. And the compelling part for myself is that as each round goes on, you get an idea as to how a couple of stocks will move, and you can utilize that as a guide to determine which stocks you want to go for. And so as you're bidding for these stocks, you can also look at what stocks other people are going for, and maybe determine that, hey, they seem to be holding a lot of interest in these. Maybe I should bid into that as well. But of course, they could be trying to trick you into that. And so you can also take a look and see and analyze what other people are doing and the information you have in front of you to try to properly invest and make the most money in that ways. And so there's many different ways that you can play, especially with expansions. You can play with variable rises and falls in stocks, advisors that grant you abilities, etc. But even the base game in and of itself is extremely solid as well. I also really like this because I'm a very mathy person who is, especially as a kid, I was very interested in stocks. I enjoyed that one project where you actually invest in stocks with imaginary money and see how it plays out. And so I realized that as I'm explaining this, there might be some people who are like, yeah, this is not a game for me whatsoever. And that's totally cool. This is definitely one that will appeal more to people who like math or who enjoy that idea of stock trading or the stock market. But because I do, and because this game is just really well produced and well thought out, that is going to be why it is my number 8. All right, for number 7, I believe if I take a look here, this is my top rated party game. I do enjoy party games quite a bit. There's probably more on my list than there would be on the average. This was number 5 last year, so it dropped a slight bit, but I still enjoy it. This is dead last, and so you're playing as a competitor in a battle royale that plays similar. The best way I describe it, anyways, is that it plays very similar to an episode of Survivor, which is a show that I absolutely love to watch. So the goal is getting to the end of the round to get gold, and so there's going to be multiple rounds. So even if you're eliminated, you still get a chance to come back and get the gold on the next round. And then whoever has the most gold over multiple rounds wins. And so the thing I enjoy about the formula is how that game plays out. Having that set amount of time where you're just talking to people as far as who you want to vote to eliminate. And at the end, of course, just like a regular episode of Survivor or anything else with elimination, you vote on who you want to eliminate, with the twist that you also have to be in the majority vote. If you don't vote for the majority person, you are also out of the game. And then to twist things even further, each person has that ambush card where if you are the majority vote, you can play the ambush card, and rather than yourself being eliminated, you get to choose to eliminate one of the people who voted for you. But if you play it wrong, you're also out. So there's this very metagame feeling that comes with it. It's like that social politics, just with the switch flipped to 150%, and it's just very chaotic. And I've had mini games where you could just like look over the person, and because like everyone's color coordinated, I might be like looked over here, like give a nod over there, or be look to the next person, like point to my shirt as far as that's the color who you should vote for. really interesting things. And then I've had outrageous moments where people would stand up and start whispering at other people's ears, and it just gets absolutely insane. And I love that. I love being able to look around and kind of give subtle hints. And yet, while I'm doing that, someone else might be doing the same thing. So if I'm not aware that, the majority of people might be trying to go for me, well, then I can easily find myself in a sticky situation. So this is a blast to play with a group of people, and it only gets more chaotic with more people in a good way. Unfortunately, I haven't played that much this year, hence the very slight drop, but hoping to do more in this new year. That's going to be number 7, Dead Last. Number 6 is one that has jumped. This was 11 last year, and this is going to be Sentinels of the Multiverse. So you're playing as a group of superheroes battling a supervillain, kind of like an Avengers movie put into a game with all original characters and locations, for better or worse. Maybe some of you really like that licensed IP for Marvel or DC. I actually personally find this refreshing, where each character in here has their own backstory that's fleshed out to an amazing degree, and it really helps to make you feel like you're playing out a comic strip throughout the game. I love the thematic nature of each hero and villain. Some who might rely on speed, or some who use ninja tactics, and while it can be a little bit tough to put that into a game of this nature, I think the designers did a really good job at showcasing that in this game. And the villains themselves, they all also have really unique playstyles that allow for a unique experience with each game. And of course, even with the base box, you get 10 heroes, 4 villains, and you can kind of mix and match just to come up with these different combinations, which is amazing. The other thing I want to give praise to is the app. The one major thing about this is that it can be very heavy on the math and triggering events, where you have to, let's say one person deals this much damage to a character, and because of an effect, that triggers this card and it triggers that, and it can lead to a little bit of confusion sometimes. But the app does a fantastic job at calculating all that, so you don't have to do any of that. It just makes the experience incredibly smooth, rather than relying on your memory. And for myself, that's a big deal, especially when you make, have those multiple triggers here. So it just really smooths out the experience, which is really great. And so that's part of the reason why it had moved up. I found it to be more and more enjoyable to play and explore with the worlds that is there. And I found that I've been just really enjoying the game for what it was created to be there. And the expansions have added to the experience. So that is Sentinels of the Multiverse, my number 6. All right, we are getting into the top 5. Here we go. Number 5 is a game that was 4, so it dropped 1 place. And this is Camel Up. So this is a very light betting game where you're observing a camel race and you're trying to make the most money. And you're going to be doing so by betting on which camel will win throughout the different legs and in the entire race, progressing the race further and impacting how the camels are going to move around the racetrack. And so the first obvious thing is that the game and the components are drop dead gorgeous. If I were to put a list of like my top components or top presentations of all time, there'd be a serious case for this being my number 1 game. It's just absolutely fantastic, and as a tactile experience, it is not only visually stunning, but it's very fun to play around with all of the components, with the camels moving up on top of each other and all these different things. The tiles are a nice thickness, and they have that really cool feel. All of it's very neat and just beautifully made. And speaking of which, the race itself, I mentioned the camels stacking on top of each other. The race itself and how it plays out is exhilarating as well. As someone who is a math person, like I said, it's always fun to play around with the probability as to what the logical thing is to do, but also calculating the risk and the idea of, okay, what if, let's say maybe a camel that comes behind all of a sudden pulls up in the lead? What if it all lines up, and if I can get this, or if it ends up working out for me, how much money I'll be able to gain over my competitors? And so because there are so many of these different variables at play, when something incredible does happen, it's a huge deal. I've had many experiences where something happens and everyone goes nuts because it completely changes the game state and who is winning, and people are suddenly losing bids that seemed safe, but all of it turns south. And so there's a I really love the chaos. I seem to like a lot of games that are very chaotic, but yeah, I love all the chaos, everything that is thrown into this game. Another game where it rarely ever stops at just one play. Oftentimes people will ask to have this played 2, 3 times in a game session. So this is going to be Camel Up, a staple in my collection. With the second edition, they add those crazy camels in as well, where you have the 5 camels going forward towards the race, but if you ever have a camel hop onto a crazy camel and the crazy camel dice is rolled, it moves them back. So you add that on, and then with the little tiles that allow you to cheer or boo the camels and change the standings in such a way, the game just lends itself to a lot of get off the chair moments, and that it really is something special in gaming, I find. So yeah, Camel Up, my number 5. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Yeah, there we go. Number 4 is another one that dropped down one place, so not a whole lot. And this is another cooperative game with a potential hidden traitor element. This is Shadows over Camelot. And so here you're playing as Knights of the Round Table, trying to accomplish your different quests as a group and bring good to the kingdom before the evil forces conquer. And so, like I said, you can play this as a totally cooperative experience, which I have mostly just because I've been teaching this game a lot. I don't think I've ever had an experience where I had the same game group twice. But you can also add in a potential traitor in the midst as well, where everyone's seeking to do good, but there's one person who is secretly trying to progress the forces of evil. And so each turn is incredibly simple. You decide to take one turn to progress evil, and there's 1 or 3 ways you can do that. So there's one action to progress evil, and then you take one heroic action, which again is 1 out of 4 or 5 potential actions. So you take one bad action, one good action. That's your turn. Very simple and straightforward in that regard. Even though there are a lot of different things that are going on the board, it still is relatively straightforward, where you can kind of take your action and work together with other people, and it is still very palatable as well. The game also has what I feel is a natural build-up that helps with the storytelling of this game. And so because of those different options, you can choose where to go based off of the cards in your hand and where other people want to go and how you progress evil. But as it ramps up, it becomes even more and more intense, and each decision is important in deciding the outcome. And so it makes the climax of the story very riveting, and that conclusion satisfying, regardless whether you win or lose. It also means that because there's so many options, and because there's just so much that's going on, you can't actually do everything. And so you have to pace out what you need to sacrifice, or what you need to hold on to as a bit of a tug of war, or what you need to go to accomplish your good quests. And so it's very interesting how you play out this massive game of a tug of war with the game itself, and potentially, of course, like I said, with another hidden traitor. And so yeah, this is one that has been a staple. This is kind of my grail game, where again, this is very much out of print, but I love to pull this out. I was actually very lucky to get a brand new copy a couple of years ago. I don't know how, but I was very lucky to get a copy of this in the expansion, and it's a classic. It's another staple in my collection. That is Shadows over Camelot, number 4. Into the top 3. And there's a little bit of a similarity between these three as far as a reason why. And the big theme, I'll even say right off the bat, is the asymmetry. All these 3 games, that's something I really like in board games, is that idea of asymmetry in the game. And so my number 3 is a very classic one. This is Disney Villainous. Here you're playing as one of many different classic Disney villains to accomplish your own special goal by moving along in your realm, collecting power that helps you to play cards that will also help to accomplish your mission. And you're also trying to stop your opponents from progressing their goal as you play heroes and events that disrupt what your opponents are doing. So like I said, this is extremely asymmetrical. Each villain is wildly unique in how they play, their end goal, the cards and actions that are available to them, and the challenges that they face. And so it means that each character feels very thematic as well. I'd say I don't think there is a weak character in the game regarding the feel of the characters. This is one of my favorite games to pull out with my wife and with others who just love the Disney franchise. And part of that is that appeal that the franchise brings. But I also enjoy how it almost marries this widespread appeal and introduces concepts that are more in line with the modern board game. And so it is a more complicated thing than your usual mainstream games, your Monopoly, your Life, all these things. But the theme is brought out incredibly well, and the game is intuitive, which still makes it accessible to others. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I like it and why it has risen. Again, I said this was number 6 last year. You kind of realize the impressive feat for design that this game brings. And so that's one of the biggest reason there. It's just a classic at this point for myself, me and my wife, my family. We have some friends that we will pull this out. It's just every time they come over, this is one of the games we will play. So yeah, Disney Villainous, my number 3. Number 2, I've done a review to this, and this was my number 1 game last year. This is Root. This is a very highly asymmetrical war game. You're playing as one of many different factions, each who play wildly different with different mechanics. Cats play like a real-time strategy game, Vagabond like a role-playing game. You have Otters with a trading mechanic, Badgers having pick up and deliver mechanics, and each faction has many different mechanics, which makes it very unique, all with the goal of being the first to score 30 points. There is an alternate win condition, but that's really the main scoring condition there. And so with this one, the asymmetry is through the roof. I played this on the stream a couple weeks ago, and you can kind of see that there as well. And while there are basic concepts overall, each faction functions different and will have their own unique way of breaking certain rules or introducing these different concepts that complement the game well. And so it means you can also have different people who gravitate to different styles and allows you to play the same game, yet according to your favorite play style. So all different, yet working together at the same time, like this dance that is going on. The presentation is amazing as well. The custom meeples are absolutely adorable. The art is vivid and fun to look at, and the whole, like the world creation, the way it looks on the board and the way the mechanics play out, it all sucks you into this lore and it tells a grand story. I also enjoy that there is a high level of interaction between all of the players. And I know some would maybe prefer for something more along the lines of Villainous, where the interaction is like it's there, but it's much more minimal, and yet there still has that asymmetry. But I actually really love being heavily involved in other people's stories. It's kind of like real life. Like the things you do in life are going to make a major impact in other people's lives. And I like that aspect of it in this game, where the things you do on the game will heavily impact the strategies other people take or how other people will view you. The only downside, the one downside to this game, is that it is very difficult to table for myself. A teaching can be rough with certain groups. Because of all the different rules, it is very hard to get everyone to have a grasp. I often tell people, the first game, literally just focus on learning the rules. And so that often means for some people, for people who want to learn a game in 15 minutes and just be ready to play, it doesn't really happen that way. You almost play one full 2-hour game, hour and a half game, learn the factions, and then the next game you can start to get really competitive with it potentially. And then of course, if you're learning a different faction, then you have to learn it all over again. But the app also helps tremendously with all of that. I think Root has one of the best board game apps, if not the best board gaming app to date. And so, yeah, it still has the legs to potentially be my number 1, but just because of that one reason and not being able to play it as much, it has slightly dropped. But I do know some friends who have gotten this game, so I might get some plays in. So we'll see if it stays there, if it drops, goes back up to number 1. But yeah, that's gonna be Root. And my number 1, to no one's surprise, it's Unmatched. And again, it's this highly asymmetric skirmish game where you're piloting a certain character from either a public domain work of art to various licensed characters trying to bring their health down to 0. I don't know why I would necessarily need to explain all this, because most of you are for Unmatched. But the thing that I find most intriguing, of course, is the combat, that playing cards both to attack and to defend. But there's a little bit of an element of predicting what your opponent is playing based on how they move, the tactics being used, what your opponent's character is, the cards that have been played before. And so utilizing the positioning on the board, potentially going back and forth, maybe baiting out a defense before hitting hard with an attack. The combat system is really tight. And so because of that, it's a very simple, streamlined system that is still dynamic and just fun to play out. And so I often compare this game as the board game equivalent of Super Smash Brothers. And there are actually, like, the more that I think about it, there are a lot more similarities between the two games than people may realize. This is a really good comparison if you want to, compare the two in their respective worlds. This is also relatively short compared to other games, which is a huge thing for me because I don't often have time to sit down for 3 hours to play. And so because that is short, it's fairly easy to learn and understand. I get there's, different effects, different characters are harder to do that. But with the mechanics at play, what looks like a simple, lightweight game becomes a lot deeper than you realize. And it's very deceptive in that way. The characters themselves are also very unique and thematic. So you have, thinking of like Sherlock, who is actually guessing what his opponents are going to be using. And so if he guesses it correctly, well, of course, that means it won't do anything to him because he's able to guess it and react accordingly. Or you have Bigfoot, who isn't the most elegant character, but he's just going crashing around and taking big swings, and then he's disappearing and just waiting for the next time to strike. All these different characters are absolutely thematic, which means that each matchup you also might approach a game with a different strategy as you face these different characters. And then on top of all of that, the art and the production is absolutely phenomenal. The cards and the dials are vivid and expressive. The miniatures give me that feeling of being a kid who is, playing with their toys as they're going along fighting. And so there's a good reason why I enjoy streaming this game. It's beautiful, it's stunning in the art department. It's bursting with theme and flavor, with combat that is interactive and simple yet incredibly deep, despite its potential depth. Because of its refined polish, it never feels overly deep or overbearing. It just feels like the pure definition of fun. And so that is why it's number one. A lot of similarities to why I actually like Root, with the only big difference is that this is a little bit shorter and I would say more accessible to a wider audience. And so those are the reasons why Unmatched is my number one game of all time. So that is my top 15, or in other words, if you've watched the whole series, the top 45 games of all time. Let me know in the chat, either here on Twitch or if you're watching on YouTube, what your thoughts are on all of this, whether you like some of the games, whether you agree or if you disagree. I would love to hear people's opinion. But that is going to be it for the list. Thank you so much for tuning in each week and taking a look at that.